Number 7. Nora Jackson. After a night out with friends, Nora Jackson returned home in the early morning hours of June the 5th of 2005 to find that her mother had been fatally stabbed and left in a pool of blood on the floor of her bedroom. Their residence, a ranch house in Memphis, Tennessee, had also been ransacked, and there were reportedly signs that a break-in had occurred. For the next several months, Jackson was questioned about the incident by Shelby County investigators. The interviews led law enforcement to conclude that she'd been responsible, and on September the 29th, she was formally charged with her mother's murder. Jackson was held in custody on a $500,000 bail, and because she was unable to post a considerable sum of money, ended up spending more than 3 years in jail while awaiting her trial. When her case's legal proceedings finally commenced in February of 2009, the prosecution attempted to portray Jackson as an erratic individual who'd frequently partake in the use of drugs and alcohol. The assistant district attorney relied heavily on the testimony of one of the young woman's friends, Andrew Hammack, who recounted how he'd received a series of calls and texts from Jackson around the time of the murder, through which she'd asked him to meet at her house. There was a lack of physical proof supporting the notion that the 22-year-old had perpetrated her mother's killing. Nevertheless, the prosecution's arguments, centered predominantly on circumstantial evidence, were convincing enough for the jury to find her guilty of second-degree murder. She was consequently sent to prison for 20 years and 9 months. It wasn't until August of 2014 that a new piece of potentially exculpatory evidence surfaced, and the Tennessee Supreme Court agreed to review Jackson's case. As was detailed in court records, Hammack had previously written a note to the prosecution in which he'd admitted to giving his phone to a friend, as well as being under the influence of drugs on the night of the murder. Knowing that it would undermine the credibility of their key witness, the prosecution had withheld the note from the defense. Upon reviewing the case, the Supreme Court unanimously overturned Jackson's conviction. She later entered an Alford plea, allowing her to officially maintain her innocence while legally taking responsibility for the murder, and was released from prison in August of 2016. Number 6. Isaiah Andrews. In 1974, a worker on his lunch break found the body of Regina Andrews in Forest Hill Park on the border of Cleveland and Cleveland Heights, Ohio. The woman had been wrapped in bedding taken from 3 different hotels in the area, including one where Willie Watts had stayed the previous night. Local police discovered that there were linens missing from Watts' room, and although he was initially arrested, he was later released upon providing a solid alibi. It was the victim's husband, Isaiah Andrews, who was ultimately charged with her murder. Although there was no physical evidence that linked Andrews to the crime, detectives built their case against him by using the testimony of witnesses who claimed that he'd been acting strangely after his wife had gone missing. In 1975, Andrews was convicted of the murder, and he spent the next 45 years in prison. In 2018, the Ohio Innocence Project found that Cleveland police had withheld the evidence that led to their arrest of Watts during the case's original trial. The latter passed away in 2011, having never been revisited as a suspect following his initial release. In the wake of the discovery, Andrews was granted a new trial in October of 2021, where he was found not guilty of the crime for which he'd spent more than 4 decades behind bars. In April of 2022, Andrews passed away at the age of 83. Number 5. The erroneous Rikers Island releases. In March of 2021, a murder suspect from Brooklyn, New York, was mistakenly released from the Otis Bantam Correctional Center on Rikers Island. 26-year-old Christopher Buggs was being held in jail without bail while waiting to stand trial for the 2018 killing of Ernest Brownlee. According to subsequent reports, Buggs' inadvertent release from custody had been caused by a clerical error made while his paperwork was being filed. The New York Police Department promptly launched an extensive manhunt for Buggs, whom they labeled as armed and dangerous. Mayor Bill de Blasio publicly expressed confidence in the NYPD's ability to track Buggs down, while also ensuring that he would be implementing safeguards to prevent similar mistakes from being made in the future. Within a week of Bugs's wrongful release, another man accused of a violent crime was accidentally freed from Rikers Island by way of a clerical oversight. The authorities were able to reapprehend the second suspect, identified as Nikim Meekins, after a few days, while Bugs remained a free man until April of 2021, when he was eventually tracked down. It was reported that 4 correctional workers, including an assistant deputy warden, were suspended without pay in connection to the 2 erroneous releases. Number 4. Harvey Marceline. On March the 14th of 2022, the New York City Police Department announced that they'd taken a person of interest into custody in connection to the murder of Brooklyn resident Susan Layden. The 83-year-old suspect was identified as Harvey Marceline, a transgender woman who'd previously served 2 stints in prison that combined had amounted to several decades. She'd been arrested for a pair of felony assaults before finally being imprisoned for fatally shooting girlfriend Jacqueline Bonds inside a Harlem apartment in 1963. Marceline spent the next 20 years behind bars and was released in May of 1984. The following year, she was taken back into custody after stabbing her girlfriend to death in Central Park. The NYPD reported that the victim's body had been placed inside a trash bag and left on the side of the road in Manhattan. At the time of both killings, Marceline had yet to publicly identify as a woman. Following the 1985 fatal stabbing, she was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to a prison term of only 6 to 12 years, which some considered a lenient punishment given her status as a repeat offender. During a state parole board hearing in 1997, Marceline openly admitted that she had problems with women, but was once again granted release. On March the 1st of 2022, security cameras at a Manhattan Home Depot captured Marceline and another woman purchasing trash bags, cleaning fluid, and a saw. The following day, a concerned passerby contacted the police about a suspicious shopping cart that Marceline had left on a street corner in the Cypress Hills neighborhood of Brooklyn. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered mutilated human remains inside a trash bag that had been placed in the cart. Law enforcement then searched Marceline's apartment, where they found Layden's severed head and other body parts in blood-splattered shopping bags. The police also retrieved CCTV footage from a local store in which Marceline was shown standing up from her wheelchair, revealing the presence of the victim's plastic-wrapped leg on the seat beneath her. When details of the horrific murder began circulating online, it caused many to question why Marceline, a 2-time convicted killer with a documented inclination for violence against women, had ever been released from custody in the first place. Number 3. Joyce Watkins and Charlie Dunn. On June the 26th of 1987, Tennessee couple Joyce Watkins and Charlie Dunn picked up the former's great niece, Brandy, from another relative's house, where she'd been staying for the previous 2 months. The next morning, Brandy inexplicably became unresponsive, and Watkins rushed her to the hospital, where she ultimately passed away the following day. Emergency room doctors found signs that Brandy had been assaulted and physically abused, and a medical examiner determined that she'd suffered her injuries during the period in which she'd been with Watkins and Dunn. Although they denied any wrongdoing, the two subsequently faced criminal charges in connection to Brandy's death. In 1988, they were both convicted and sentenced to life in prison, with the preceding legal proceedings hinging heavily on the testimony of the victim's medical examiner. With the help of the Tennessee Innocence Project, the state's conviction review unit reopened the case in 2021. By that time, Dunn had already passed away in prison, while Watkins had been released on parole but was still perceived as guilty of her great niece's death from a legal standpoint. An updated analysis of the case's original physical evidence determined that there was absolutely no indication that either Watkins or Dunn had had anything to do with Brandy's abuse or her resulting death. State investigators also found that the prosecution had used unreliable testimony, and misrepresented facts to manipulate the jury's final verdict. In January of 2022, it was reported that both Watkins and Dunn had been officially cleared of their convictions. Today's topic was requested by Jesse Drew. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Kimberly Long. On October the 6th of 2003, California woman Kimberly Long returned to her Corona residence where she came upon the lifeless body of her boyfriend, 33-year-old Oswaldo Conde. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was ultimately determined that the victim had been dead for quite some time after having been struck in the head with a blunt object. Following a police investigation, Long was formally charged with Conde's murder in spite of her solid alibi of having been out with a friend on the night of the incident. The woman's acquaintance, who would have served as a crucial witness in her defense, had been killed in a traffic accident before her trial started. Although Long's first round of legal proceedings ended in a hung jury, she was ultimately convicted of the murder following a second trial in 2005. At the time of the conviction, the judge presiding over the case commented that he would have found Long not guilty, but she was nevertheless given a life sentence. Upon losing an appeal to the guilty verdict, she officially began serving her prison term in 2009. 7 years later, Judge Patrick Magers, the same judge who'd begrudgingly sentenced Long to life imprisonment, reversed her conviction. The decision was reached on the grounds that Long's public defender had failed to call any forensic pathologist to the witness stand during the trial in order to address the time of Conde's death. Judge Magers suggested that had the jury been made properly aware of when the victim had died, they would have realized that Long had still been out of the house when the murder was committed. On April the 22nd of 2021, the Riverside District Attorney formally dismissed all charges against Long, thus granting her full exoneration. Number 1. Richard Jones. Richard Jones was released from custody on June the 8th of 2017 after spending the previous 17 years at the Lansing Correctional Facility in Kansas. In 2000, he'd been convicted of aggravated robbery in connection to an incident that had taken place in the parking lot of a Walmart in Roland Park. The 41-year-old had maintained his innocence throughout the case's legal proceedings and had even presented investigators with a valid alibi. Additionally, it was reported that there was no physical evidence, DNA, or fingerprints that placed him at the crime scene. Despite the dearth of inculpatory material, Jones was ultimately arrested and charged after both the victim of the robbery and a Walmart security guard had picked his mugshot out of a lineup. While serving his sentence, Jones fruitlessly attempted to appeal his conviction for 15 years until he finally made headway by partnering with the Midwest Innocence Project and the Project for Innocence at the University of Kansas School of Law. The team of attorneys was able to establish that the crime had actually been committed by another man in the Kansas prison system. He was reported to bear a striking resemblance to Jones, essentially rendering his entire ordeal as a case of mistaken identity. The other inmate, named as Ricky Amos, couldn't be charged for the 1999 robbery because of the statute of limitations. However, Jones's conviction was ultimately overturned and he was finally granted his rightful freedom. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have jury duty every day for a month or give up your favorite food for a year? Let us know in the comments section below.